Hello, my name is Dr. Lizzie Parker, and I'm going to talk about the power of nutrition and feeding our cats and dogs. The role of the Purina Institute is that we are the voice of Purina science, and we believe that science is so much more powerful when it is shared. All of us are aware of the critical and important role that nutrition plays in the health and well-being of our cats and dogs. But the actual awareness of that true power and the impact that nutrition can do is still relatively low. In some global research, we found that less than 1 in 4 veterinarians around the world proactively talk about nutrition to their clients. And if veterinarians shy away from these conversations, then pet owners are going to go to other sources like Dr. Google for that information. And that's a real shame, because 83% of pet owners also told us that they completely trust the information that they get from their vet, and yet less than half of them receive it. Unlike ourselves, when we're feeding our cats and dogs and we have almost 100% control over what goes into their mouths, this is when we can really demonstrate what nutrition can do. And over the last 20 years, there's been a significant evolution, both in our understanding of what nutrition can do, but also the technologies that are available for us. So maybe 20 years ago, we got excited about specific ingredients and what they were doing, and then we started looking for specific nutrients in ingredients. But today, we talk about molecular nutrition. And through technologies like metabolomics, we can now look at metabolic pathways and identify anomalies in some of those metabolites to give us those insights to say, is there something that we can do from a nutrition molecule and a nutritional intervention to help with this issue or address a concern? So I'm now just going to give you a number of different and diverse ways that actually nutrition can not only have an impact on the cat and the dog, but also on those pet owners that love them. And the first example I'm going to give is not the actual diet itself, but it's all around how we feed and the amounts we feed. And in fact, even though it seems an incredible claim, it is actual fact that if we keep dogs lean from puppyhood throughout their life, we can actually extend their life. So Purina undertook a 14-year longevity study with Labrador retrievers. And these Labradors were basically split into 2 groups. Everything was absolutely identical. The only thing was that one group were kept in a really lean body condition, and the others were kept at your typical Labrador size. And what we're able to show was that at the end of life, we could actually extend that life of those Labrador retrievers by nearly 2 years. And also we saw a real delay in the onset of clinical signs of chronic disease, including the severity of osteoarthritis, a delay in the times when you actually saw the decline in lean body mass and also in immune function. And this was all simply down to keeping those dogs lean. And I haven't got time to talk about it today, but actually there's over 25 peer-reviewed papers have come out of this study. There were a lot more insights that we're able to show following those dogs. But the key thing was, keep them lean, you can actually extend their life. Now I want to talk about the impact of nutrition on cognitive health. And this is an example where, again, we are much more advanced in our understanding and what we can do with our cats and dogs than what we can do with humans. So even when we're looking at the developing brain, when the puppy actually has achieved 90% of its adult mass by 12 weeks, that if we can actually use the DHA, so DHA is that omega-3 fatty acid that's a key component of gray and white matter in the brain that's associated with memory and learning. We did a study where we actually fed puppies from 3 to 16 weeks of age with the DHA, and then we compared them to the cohort, their litter mates, that weren't fed the DHA. And in a maze test, the actual puppies that were supplemented, they completed that maze 25% faster than their litter mates. So that's the impact that we can have on the developing brain. But I think where we can really have shown big advancements is how we can take nutrition to actually slow down brain aging. So the healthy brain is a huge consumer of glucose. It's its primary energy source. But from around about 7 years of age, the ability to use glucose starts declining. And this results in the cells essentially being starved. They basically will die. And then ultimately, this is when we see the clinical signs as the dog ages of cognitive dysfunction. So what we wanted to do was to say, could we actually find an alternative energy source that the aging brain could use? And this is where we looked at medium-chain triglycerides, which are actually converted to ketone bodies. And the actual ketone bodies can actually be used as a preferential energy source by those aging brain cells. So in a study, we actually took dogs that were 7 years plus, and we actually fed them we fed them with the MCTs, and then we put them through a series of cognitive tests. So we were looking at their coping ability, their interaction, but also their memory. And what we were able to show was that the dogs that were supplemented with the MCTs, not only did they make fewer errors on those tests, but actually this you saw the more significant when they're on more complex tasks. And additionally, we were able to see improvements in memory in as little as 2 weeks. So this, again, is a nutritional intervention where we can understand how we can provide a different energy source through diet that will help that brain and essentially slow down brain aging. So what about cats, you might ask? Well, indeed, we can do cognitive tests with them. But instead of using the MCTs, what we looked at here was a different blend. So this was a blend of fish oil, B vitamins, antioxidants, as well as arginine. And these were middle-aged to older cats. And at the end of that year of going through different tests, whether it was coping or visual learning, again, we saw that those that were on that specific brain protection blend, they made fewer errors in that cognitive tests than those that weren't supplemented. And then finally, I'd like to also share how nutrition can actually help with brain disease. Now, for all of you, you're aware that these are probably the most challenging cases that you have in clinic. And we collaborated with the Royal Veterinary College in London, in the UK, and what we were working with was the really difficult cases, so the refractory epileptic cases. And what we did is we kept them on the same drug, so we didn't change the drugs. The only thing that we did was we fed them a diet that was actually containing these medium-chain triglycerides, the MCTs, as well as a few additional other brain nutrients. And as little as 90 days, 71% of those dogs showed a reduction in seizure frequency. But even more powerful was that 14% of those dogs went seizure-free. And this is an example where you're not just changing the life of that dog, but the owner and also the vet. So again, this was where we were actually feeding the diet. They kept them on the drugs, but you could see just by feeding the diet, this is the impact that it had on these cases. So now I want to talk about the microbiome, because this is an area where we've only just touched the surface and understanding how nutrition can play a really key role. As many of you are aware, microbiome is involved in many physiological processes that are vital to the actual host, not least that we get 10% of our energy actually from the microbiome. But also we're seeing more and more papers which are demonstrating that changes in the microbiome are linked to diseases both in humans and animals. So you've seen the cases where we're looking at microbiome with IBD, asthma, obesity. But the area that we found really interesting was that there was also insights to show that the microbiota, the actual bacteria, is also involved in neurodevelopment conditions. And we're getting much more insights now to be able to show that there is a connection between what is the actual crosstalk between the gut and the brain. You'll have heard about the gut-brain axis. So what we wanted to be able to see was, could we actually use and find a probiotic that could actually help dogs? Because 70% of cases that veterinary behaviorists see are associated to behavioral disorders and some sort of anxiety. So this is a significant problem that we're seeing in our dogs. So our challenge was, can we find a probiotic that can help? So one of the great things about being part of the bigger Nestlé is the fact that they have been working in the area of probiotics for over 30 years. So this gives us an opportunity not only for transfer of knowledge, but also opportunities to leverage proprietary cell cultures. So although we have got lots of clinical data linked to the Ephesium SF68 strain that you see in Fortiflora related to gut health, immune function, and stress, not every single probiotic can do everything. And there was one specific strain that Nestlé has been working on for over 18 years, which is a Bifidobacterium longum BL999, that is the proprietary strain, where we'd already got those insights that it can actually help reduce anxiety-like behavior in mice, but also we had those insights to show that anxious behavior actually gets transferred with gut microbes. So we challenged ourselves to say, by feeding that BL999, can we manipulate that gut and help those dogs that were actually showing anxious behaviors? So in a study with some Labradors that were showing anxious behaviors, this was a placebo-controlled, randomized crossover study. Half of the dogs were fed the BL999, half of those were actually fed a placebo. And what we were looking for was the absence or presence of behavioral problems, such as barking, jumping, spinning, pacing. We also looked at physiological responses, so salivary cortisol and heart rate, and also heart rate variability. And what we were able to show was that feeding and supplementing those dogs with the BL999, we could actually reduce both the problem behaviors, but this was also demonstrated physiologically as well. And from that, we were able to demonstrate that just using a probiotic, we can actually elicit positive changes in emotional state in our dogs. And then just to finish, I want to talk about another nutritional intervention. And this really came from something that's foundational to Purina, where we believe that not only pets and people belong together, but they're better together. And one of the unfortunate things is that globally, up to 1 in 5 adults are actually allergic to cats. And this has a real impact, not just obviously on cat ownership, it also impacts cat relinquishment. And for those people that do have allergies to cats and keep their cats, and there are many of them, it also impacts that really close cat-owner relationship that you all have. Now, by the way, 95% of people, or 95% of the cat allergic instances are down to one allergen. It's called FeLD1. And this FeLD1, by the way, is produced by every single cat. So there's no such thing as hypoallergenic cats. Even hairless cats produce FeLD1. And it's produced primarily in the salivary and the sebaceous glands. So what we challenged ourselves was there some way that we could actually neutralize it? Because what happens is that when it's secreted in the saliva, when the cat grooms, she then transfers that FeLD1 onto the hair. And then when that dries, it enters into the environment on that shed hair and dander. Now, what we don't want to do, because we don't know what FeLD1 actually does, we don't know what its biological role is in the cat. So the last thing that we wanted to do is look to stop the production, and we certainly didn't want to impact the cat's physiology. But we thought, is there some way that we could actually find a way to neutralize it after it's been produced in the saliva? So this has been over 10 years of research. In that time, we went from benchtop right the way through to the actual studies in the cat. And essentially how this technology works is that we leveraged a very safe and proven technology, which is actually using IgY. And that's the mammalian, or the avian equivalent, I should say, of mammalian IgG. And what we wanted to do is to produce a specific antibody against the FeLD1. So that was the start of the work. And then what we were able to demonstrate was that by producing this specific anti-FeLD1 antibody, taking an egg product ingredient that contained it, we then coated it on the outside of a dry kibble so that when the cat actually chewed the food, the antibody then bound to the actual salivary FeLD1 in that cat's mouth. So that when the cat then started grooming, the neutralized FeLD1 is actually distributed on the cat's hair and dander, so that when it's actually released into the environment, it's no longer recognized as an allergen. So that was the whole premise behind what we did. And through our studies, this culminated in a study that was published in 2019, where we were able to demonstrate by feeding these cats a kibble that had been coated in this egg product ingredient containing this very specific anti-FeLD1 antibody, that we could actually significantly reduce the amount of active FeLD1 on the hair and dander, starting in the 3rd week of feeding that diet, but we could actually reduce it by an average of 47%. So the key thing here is, and it's important to say, is this is not a panacea. So when people have sensitivities to cats, they're already undergoing lots of different management ways to actually help reduce the allergens. What this is offering up through a nutritional intervention is a new approach that can actually neutralize the amount of active FeLD1 that enters into the environment. And I think that, again, this really just demonstrates that real power that nutrition can do, that we can actually use a nutritional component to even help reduce something that the cat is producing, but by the way, after its production, without actually changing the cat's physiology. So I just want to finish by saying that it's really, really important to have the nutrition conversations. It's very different when we're feeding our cats and dogs, when we have so much more control, and we're so much more advanced in understanding that real powerful impact it can have on their health and well-being. And as with everything, science is so much more powerful when it is shared. Thank you.